Okay, in this video, I wanted to do a presentation of some of the basic ideas of Buddhism. Our class has started this study. We're following the outline of this material in Houston Smith's text on the world religions. Uh, we've also asked the class to look at some videos for background. I've recommended a couple of animated videos. One was called The Life of Buddha. The other is The Way of Buddha. They're, uh, not sophisticated animations, but I think the content in those videos is pretty good. Plus, they tell some of the stories of Buddha's beginning and uh, and just some of the stories that illustrate basic principles of Buddhism. So I think those videos are interesting from a number of points of view. Also asked, there was one video I included, a Khan Academy video on the beginnings of Buddhism as well, which gives some historical context and shows a little bit the influence of Hinduism on Buddhism that we wanted to include. So Buddhism continues to be of interest in the West. I think probably as an alternative to Western religions, Western ways of thinking about religions. So let's take a look at some of the basic ideas. Thought we'd start with this statue of Buddha, which is one of the famous images of Buddha. This one's located in Japan, in Kamakura. And most of these statues have represent something of what Buddhism can bring people to, a kind of state of peace and quiet and inner awareness. And it's I think that's one of the reasons why Buddhism is an attractive alternative in terms of the world's religions, and also that is appealing. Well, we could start with a couple of prefatory remarks about Buddhism in general. In our text, Houston Smith argues that Buddhism is to Hinduism as Christianity is to Judaism. You could say that Hinduism and Judaism are similar to each other in that they're both ethnic religions or religions of a particular people. But being connected with a particular ethnic group of people, kind of restricts access to these fundamental religions. So Smith's point of view is that there was too much truth in both of them to be confined to just a particular people. So both needed to take on a more universal form. And so clearly Buddhism has emerged out of Hinduism, and similarly as Christianity emerged out of Judaism, and the religious ideas that were contained in the earlier religions thus become available to a larger world community. In terms of Buddhism, we could also say that Buddhism may have been necessary at the time of Buddha as a kind of simplification of the religious teaching of Hinduism. Over many, many years, Hinduism had become very complex and complicated in terms of trying to define it simply. This section of our presentation may be repetitious for those who have already looked at the animated videos I referred to. But it gives us a chance. I mean, I'll just summarize some of that content and say not very much factual is known about the birth of Buddha or his earliest experiences. So that lack of information is oftentimes filled in a religion with legends and stories that people come to what they believe must have been the case in the earliest stages of Buddhist development. And that doesn't mean that that they just make these things up, but because there does seem to be a correspondence between the stories they tell about these religious figures and what the content of the religion ends up being. So as far as we know, Buddha, more properly Siddhartha Gautama, was born about 563 BCE, and he was born the son of a king in the northeastern sections of India, close to the Himalayas. When he was born, his father consulted the sages and the soothsayers as to what they could say about his son, and he was told that his son was going to be a great figure. And when his father inquired in what regard, I mean, it looked as though the son could become great in the world of spiritual matters, or he could become a great worldly king. So his father clearly wanted him to become a king, wanted Siddhartha to be his successor, and didn't want him to follow a kind of otherworldly path, like a spiritual path. So his father did everything he could to protect Buddha from seeing anything or having any experience that might move him on the way towards spirituality. So he was he was protected from seeing like any of the usual negative things about life that everyone is pretty much familiar with. So this existence persisted for a long time for Buddha, and I think it's really, they say it's not until the age of 29 that he clearly sees what the human reality is. By this time he's married and he has a child. But the stories talk about Buddha going out into the world and seeing things for the first time. And what he sees first of all an old man who's weakened and creaky and having difficulty to get around. And so he becomes aware of old age as something that's in store for all of us as humans. Then he also sees somebody who's suffering from a disease or from a sickness, and becomes aware that human beings are susceptible to injuries and diseases that make it difficult for them to live their lives in any kind of normal way. And finally, he sees a dead man and becomes aware that all life sort of ends with death. And these are kind of some of the harsher realities of our human condition. I mean, you could question whether or not it's reasonable to think that Siddhartha wasn't aware of these things all the way into his late 20s, but it's more to bring these particular aspects of the human condition into focus than it is to tell an accurate story, I think, in this regard. The final experience that he has, and we see there's different renditions of this. And in one case, after seeing these these sites about old age, sickness, and then death, he comes across a monk who is seated in meditation, which gives him a kind of clue as to, or an incentive maybe, I mean, for what his future is going to be. In the videos, the animations that we saw, he encounters a monk who's given up everything and devoted himself to the pursuit of the truth, and with the idea that the truth is more important than anything. Siddhartha seems to. So after these experiences in which Siddhartha became aware of the suffering inherent in human existence, he was so moved by uh, sympathy for the suffering of others that he resolved to do whatever was necessary in order to find a solution for it. It seems a little dramatic, but according to the story, this idea overtook him. He left his family and his child and his life of privilege and set off into the world uh, to try to discover uh, some way of overcoming the ways in which human beings suffer. So he begins with some preliminary studies of meditation. At a certain point, he joins a group of ascetics and practices fasting until in such an extreme way that he was close to death, and it wasn't until a young woman came and fed him and nursed him back to health that he started to see things differently. After that experience, he determined that the way must be a kind of middle way, that the extreme approach of sort of causing the body to suffer in order to develop one's spiritual side was too extreme. So you're trying to find a middle way between letting the body have whatever it wants and the other extreme of not letting the body have anything it wants. So this middle path was based on emphasized meditation and control of the body, but not to the point of abusing the body. So you have to give the body what it needs, but not everything that it wants. So Buddha then set out. He separated from his ascetic friends, and according to the stories, and this aspect is told better, I think, in the animations, but the legends have it that at a certain point he sat down underneath a Bodhi tree and resolved to stay there until he became enlightened, and that's what happened. So at that point, once he's enlightened or has his enlightenment experience, you can say he becomes the Buddha, and which is just another way for saying that he woke up, where he's referred to as the awakened one. After his enlightenment experience, you could say the Buddha begins his teaching career, and I think again in accordance with the animations we watched. I mean, he starts with he goes back to the ascetics whom he was familiar with and brings his new approach to them, which gradually they embrace. And the fundamental aspects of his new teaching, then, it can be summarized with just the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And this seems to bear out what was said earlier about Buddhism as being a simplification, so leaving behind all the the excessive ornamentation and complexity of mythology involved in Hinduism. Buddha just asked people to be aware of four basic truths and then to follow a path that emphasized 8 different features. Well, the first noble truth is that life is suffering. Dukkha is the term used for suffering in this context. And what's meant by suffering? I mean, obviously, some of the things we talked about earlier. I mean, sickness, old age, and ultimately death. You could say all human beings suffer from those fundamental things. But also in the way that we live, there's a kind of suffering that characterizes it. And in our text, this idea is expressed by Houston Smith in the sense that our lives are lived out of joint, kind of like a wheel whose axle is off-center. If you imagine a wagon with a wheel which is off-center going down the road, you see it's anything but smooth, and that seems to characterize our existence. That's just a metaphor, but then you say, what really about our existence involves suffering? And we might resist this idea that life is suffering. And some of the fundamental things, I think, like the first point I have here is our conditioned existence. It means that we're not free to do anything that we want, that there are many different kinds of limitations that we have, that our existence places on us. So we have to deal with those, accept them, because they're part of our existence. There's no way not to have them there. There's a kind of, also, we suffer from the impermanence of everything. There's something about our psychology or our makeup or our programming, however you want to say it, that we would like it, we'd like to be able to hold on to things, or we would like to know what the truth is once and for all. And we work to have a situation that we think is good for us or acceptable for us, but there's this, as time goes on, nothing lasts forever. So, and we suffer from having to let go of things that we feel like our happiness depends on. So you could say we suffer mentally, we suffer physically. There's a lot of dissatisfaction in people's lives, things that cause sadness or make us uneasy or anxious, and a lot of difficulties that we have to overcome. Some of the words like anxiety and angst and so forth are part of the scene. This is not so different, I think, from other philosophical approaches. If I just want to comment or include, some of the fundamental existentialists like Albert Camus is also going to say something like this, that there's a lot of things about life that makes life very difficult for us. And but let's just say for now that's the human situation. The second noble truth states that the cause of our suffering is desire. And the term here is tanha. It's here I sort of have a qualifier, selfish desire, so it's not clear to me or fair to say that all desire is the cause of our suffering, but clearly certain type of desire causes us to suffer. Tanha seems to be a term which expresses a kind of thirst for things which is unquenchable. And you can see there's a lot of things that we want out of life, and we can never get enough of it. And so that kind of, because we can't satisfy that desire, causes us, ultimately, it causes us to suffer. So tanha seems to be unquenchable thirst, uh, and also a lot of striving for things that are relative to ourselves. You say selfish cravings, uh, or grasping and clinging onto things which are we feel are essential for ourselves, tempting to hold, to control, kind of desire for kind of private fulfillment. And a lot of this, you'd say there's too much ego, too much care about what's mine or what's for me. And it's this emphasis on myself, excessive emphasis on myself, is what brings me into conflict with others, and also into conflict with reality. Hence, suffering seems to be inevitable here. Generally, you could say that this cause of suffering is sort of wanting things that we can't have, or wanting things to be different than they actually are. So if we have desires in that direction, I mean, there's no way to avoid the suffering that comes along with it. So the third noble truth simply states that since suffering is the result of desire, that you can end suffering if you get rid of your desires. Uh, you can try to, that this desire is kind of like being on fire for something. So you extinguish the fires of desire, you're not going to suffer as much. You say if it's true that basically we suffer because we want things that we can't have, or we want reality to be different than what it is, that if we cease to want those things, or cease to expect things or desire that things be different than they are, we get rid of a lot of the needless suffering that plagues us. So that seems to be a major thrust of Buddhism. It's not that you would get rid, I don't think it's that you should get rid of all your desires, but in particular you should work to get rid of your selfish desires or your selfish cravings. From one point of view, you could say that Buddhism is about working to reduce the influence of ego in your life. So ego reduction. And you achieve this much in the same way that we we worked in some of the Hindu yogas by striving to find within yourself the place where this kind of liberation, where freedom becomes possible. In Buddhism, is striving to find your Buddha nature, which is what Buddha realized is supposedly a possibility for all of us, that everybody has a Buddha nature. The challenge is to be able to access it, or to get down deep enough in yourself to experience and let it manifest in your life. So again, it's kind of work towards freedom and also a kind of enlightenment. Not so different, really, from excuse me. Not so different, really, from what Hinduism was striving for. One metaphor related to Buddhism is that the Buddha is like a physician. And you can see this in the Four Noble Truths, that Buddha is diagnosing what's wrong with human beings. You can see that the symptom or the problem is that human beings suffer. that you'd say that is like represents the indicator of the problem. You say, but then what's the cause of that problem? So that's the second noble truth. So the Buddha diagnoses the problem, establishes that the cause is sort of selfish desires, and then prescribes a treatment which can help the patient sort of get well again. So you'd say the third noble truth is says that if you get rid of unnecessary desires, then you can have a better existence. So the fourth noble truth really paves the way, or shows us what we need to do in order to get better. So the fourth noble truth is the Eightfold Path. Arguably, I think most Buddhists would agree. I mean, before you would even set out on this path, you would have to be on pretty solid footing in your life. I mean, you'd have to a pretty sound moral character and right associations and so forth before even starting. That said, there's these 8 principles that one could use as guidelines for trying to be a good Buddhist. They're broken down into different groups. So I have the first 2 noble truths here underneath the heading of knowledge. So it's like before you can begin, you have to understand a few things. So you say all of these items start with the word right. And so the first one's right knowledge, which means that you have to at least understand what the human situation is, and know what's possible for us as human beings, or what should be the case. So you say right knowledge involves knowledge of the 4 noble truths, knowing what is, also what could be, what should be. Right aim is the second one. This is a different kind of knowledge, but here you kind of have to be clear almost before you start is what do you really want. A lot of times we tell ourselves that we want things, but then we live in ways that make us question, is that what I really want? So to start with, you have to try and be sincere, honest with yourself. What do you want? And it's not so simple to make yourself want, what do you think you should want? So, but the beginning is to at least be, honest with yourself about what do you think you want about life. This really takes us back to Hinduism. If you recall, we started with this basic examination of what do we want as human beings, what does everybody want, and then you reach a certain stage of life and experience where you say, okay, what do I really want? And then things become a little more serious. Well, the second grouping underneath the Eightfold Path that I have here, items 3, 4, and 5, all have to do with behavior or rules governing our actions. These set of rules seem to correspond more with our ordinary conceptions of morality, like things that you should do and things that you shouldn't do. We'll say, the first one is right speech. And you say, it looks like this means you should try to be honest, straightforward, and don't try to deceive others. Be direct, and most importantly, you should be honest with yourself first and foremost, and then secondarily with others. But don't deceive yourself about things. So be honest with yourself. It also includes not speaking not saying mean things about others, not engaging in gossip, also not engaging in what you might call idle chatter. So don't talk too much. Speak when it's necessary. The second heading here is right behavior or action, which is where the title kind of comes from. There are 5 basic precepts in Buddhism. These are familiar to us all, really. No killing, which the Buddhists take pretty seriously. No, do not steal. Again, don't lie. Do not be unchaste. And this one's a little harder to say what that means. Usually chastity has to do with sexual conduct. So I don't think the Buddhists are opposed to sexuality per se, although I think some monks might practice celibacy. But I think also it's possible for monks to be married and have a normal sexual life, but don't engage in any really unusual types of sexual behavior. I think that would be included. And the final one here is no drugs or alcohol, which would be an obstacle for some of us, I think. But the Buddhists are kind of opposed to any kind of artificial stimulation or usage of drugs. The third one on this list, right livelihood, accepts that, that we all have to do something for a living. Everybody has to have an occupation. And that's what you might end up spending, most of your time doing. And so you want to try to choose an occupation or a livelihood that's positive in some way, or that promotes life. And you wouldn't want to do something for a living that contributes to harming life in some way. So I don't know what that would include. It might include not working in a slaughterhouse, cutting up animals or anything like that, or working in an arms factory and so forth. I think right livelihood is try and find an occupation for yourself which helps other people rather than causes them more difficulty. Well, the last grouping of the Eightfold Path, 6, 7, and 8, all have something to do with how to work, how to practice meditation, and so forth. The first one's pretty general, sort of like how to try, what's the nature of a right effort. And it looks like the Buddhist would recommend this sort of kind of steadfast work, day after day, working, performing your daily duties to the best of your abilities, rather than, thinking that you can cram or sort of just work like in more intensive periods, although I think Buddhists also have intensive periods where they try to work pretty intensely for shorter periods of time. So I think both, but in general, you have to try and come up with a way or a practice for yourself that involves working on a daily basis. The last two are a little harder to pin down. You get into the more esoteric aspects of meditation. The second one's right mindfulness. This is a term that we hear a lot nowadays. You say, what's mindfulness? You want to try and work to develop a state of consciousness that's based on seeing things the way that they are. So just trying to bring a higher level of awareness into your ordinary activities. There is kind of a belief that freedom can be attained through seeing things more clearly. I mentioned Spinoza. He's just one philosopher who has some theories that correspond with this idea. You say in psychoanalysis, people are trying to understand where their behavior originates from in themselves. And theory seems to be that if you can catch a glimpse of that or start to see where something comes from, then the problem kind of goes away almost by itself. So
bringing it into the open consciousness sort of is a kind of liberating experience. So right mindfulness seems to be working in that direction. The last one, right contemplation, seems to be more of the same. In a way, you're trying to focus more intensely on yourself in a quiet, meditative way, and this seems to be in the same direction as right mindfulness. We're going to leave those basic principles, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, behind us now, and I just wanted to take a couple of slides to comment on what is retained in Buddhism as it sort of moves away from Hinduism. And there are still, a lot of, if you look at it, it looks like there's a great many similarities. Primarily, the idea of karma is still there in Buddhist thinking, and the idea of reincarnation is also still there in Buddhist thinking. You say in general, it looks like what the Buddhist is aiming for or strives for is not so different from what the Hindu strives for in the different forms of yoga. You say the one thing is that it's still definitely a less religious approach. I'm going to say that. There's some further comments on our last. Finally, briefly, we could say how is Buddhism different than Hinduism? And some of the ways are clearly obvious. There's no reference to all these deities that we spoke about in our treatment of Hinduism. So, and you could still say we still list Buddhism as a religion, but it's definitely a different kind of religion than what we're accustomed to seeing in religious teachings. If I can remind you of that introductory list I put out, I'm trying to define what religion is, that I included there, based on what Houston Smith had to say, 6 general characteristics of religion, and those included that almost every religion has some kind of authority associated with where it comes from, involves rituals, traditions, explanations, grace, and mystery. And if we apply these to Buddhism, and this was Smith's point when he brought these up, was that it doesn't look like any of them really apply to Buddhism per se, or at least in the form of basic Buddhism as we've looked at it so far. So there's no higher authority that you could say that Buddhism appeals to. You say the Buddha doesn't claim to be a god. Buddha was a human being who found a way to achieve enlightenment. So it's kind of Buddhism, you might say, is a human solution to a human problem in a way, without any appeal to supernatural or divine sources. So there's no appeal to anything other than oneself. Rituals are never viewed as being necessary or useful on this path. Only self-effort is what counts, finding a way to help yourself. Tradition doesn't really have any special weight. Doesn't matter that people have done things a certain way in the past. You kind of have to deal with your situation in the present. It's up to you. Explanations. A lot of religions give us explanations. In Buddhism, explanations are almost never the point. It may be that, that Buddhist teachings explain some things, but in general, there's very little attention given to trying to explain things. That's kind of a distraction from the work that's necessary to make progress along the way. There's also no conception of grace in Buddhism, if we think of grace as God's love or God's wish to help us along the way. So for a Buddhist, again, it's self-reliance, it's self-effort. You're on your own. Whether or not you make progress is up to you. It's not like you can't look outside yourself for assistance. And finally, there's no emphasis on anything which is supernatural or mysterious. There's only the natural world. So in a way, some people have commented on this, that Houston Smith comments on it also, that Buddhism corresponds more with a kind of psychological analysis of the human situation, and in some respects even you could say a scientific analysis of what the human situation is. You study the human condition, you see that ordinarily people have difficulties in their lives, and it may be that human reason tells us there are things that they can do to lessen some of these difficulties and to lessen the extent to which we suffer.